Hey guys, this is X, one of the many co-hosts of the Daily Football Zone podcast. This will be a little bit different of a video than our usual NFL stuff. Today we're actually going to be covering college football, and specifically, it'll be the college football top 25, Daily Football Zone's college football top 25 for the 2022 college football season. This is more of a broad general direction, I feel like, for the teams that we're gonna be covering. It's not gonna be, this team is ranked like this team is ranked like this team is ranked like this. This is just more of a general feeling, my own. I don't really have anybody with me today. It's just gonna be me. So this is all my opinions. I could be biased, I could be non-biased. It doesn't really matter. This is my show. So, yeah, we could get into it pretty soon. Just a couple disclaimers. One, I'm not gonna remember the name of everybody, and then, this is all at the top of my head, so there's gonna be some points maybe that I might get wrong, names, players, coaches, records, but, I'm gonna try my best. And then another disclaimer is that, for most of these teams in the bottom, I would probably say bottom 10, bottom 15, they're all neck and neck. So, I think I'm not gonna say this team's better than this team, just based on the general direction of the team. That's kinda how I'm ranking them. But that's not to say that, this is end all be all. And this is a way early top 25. These teams, they're in their spring practices. Currently, some of them aren't looking forward to the spring game. Some of them are gonna play their spring game pretty soon. So, yeah, I think this is it's just really it's too early for this to be definite, going into the season. Even after the spring games, we're gonna have a lot more information to base these teams off of. And yeah, so take all this with a grain of salt. It'll work out in the end. It'll work out in the end. And I already know the top 25 for the actual season, and the end one or even mid-season. It will look way different. It will look way different. There's going to be surprise teams that come out of nowhere. Um, and, you can never predict those. So we're just going to try our best to go through everything. So we could actually start right now. And we're going to actually start with the honorable mention section. I did this because these are teams that I actually do believe in. And I believe they could be top 25 teams. I wouldn't be surprised seeing any one of them, in the top 25, even maybe top 10, top 15. You never know. But the first team I wanted to mention was Duke. I'm going to try to make this fast. I recorded this earlier, but the PC shut off randomly mid recording, so I hope everything goes well this time around. But yeah, nobody hopes for a failed attempt. But yeah, so my first team is Duke. They had head coach Mike Elko in his rookie year. They went 9-4 in the ACC, and they looked really good. Main problem with Duke is just recruiting. They're not gonna be able to get some of that top tier caliber talent that other teams have, and that will always affect Duke. But it's not to say I don't believe in them. I actually do believe in that they could be a good team in the ACC. They're not going to make the playoffs. They're probably not going to be a national title contender, but I do think they could be. I would go as far to say they could be in the top 20, top 15. So it's a team I believe in. Another team this is just more of a respect pick, but it's Cincinnati. They've just been really good these past, I don't know how many seasons. I think believe since like 2018. Um, they do have the departure of Luke Fickle. Which it will hurt a lot. It will hurt a lot. It will hurt this team going forward. It will hurt this team this year. But I do believe in Cincinnati. They recruit better than the rest of the group of 5 teams. This is their first season in the Big 12, and I believe they'll contend in the Big 12. Um, they'll be really competitive. With the Big 12, all the teams are just neck and neck and neck. There's a lot of good teams, not a lot of great teams, but not a lot of bad teams either. Um, I believe the only like team that you could look at that was just like, there was a couple of teams, Iowa State, specifically Kansas. Those were teams that were pretty disappointing, and even Kansas had a really good year for Kansas standards. Kansas wasn't disappointing, but they weren't as good as the rest of the Big 12. And then Iowa State had a really disappointing year. So yeah, I believe all Big 12 teams are really close with each other, and it wouldn't surprise me if Cincinnati is one of the better of the pack. They do have head coach Scott Satterfield from Louisville. Um, Not a game-changing head coach, but he is a solid head coach. I know people are talking down on him and stuff, but I think it'll work out. Cincinnati's one of the better programs. And then UCF, it's also more of a respecting. They have Gus Malzahn as their head coach, but they've had great seasons with him. Josh Heupel, Scott Frost. It's just really well-run program, and I believe in the talent they have. But yeah, and then Boise State, I believe see, and then this is where I always get the names confused. Andy Avalos, I believe his name is. He's filling in for head coach after the departure of Brian Harsin, who had a terrible run with Auburn. But he's in his second season as a head coach right now, and he actually had a really good season. They went 10-4, and I believe they won their bowl game too as well. So yeah, really good season for Boise State, and I wouldn't be surprised to see them in the top 25. Um, they're one of the better group of 5 teams. They're always up there. And then we have Texas A&M, who had a really disappointing season last year. They went 5-7. Um, and I guess this isn't really respecting. It's more that I believe in the talent of Texas A&M. You just can't be that like down for that long. And they have some really promising young players. They have Connor Wegman, who I believe is going to start next season. Um, there was a whole quarterback carousel, but he's the one who finished down the season. They had the upset win over LSU, and he played well. I don't believe he threw an interception. He threw around like 8 touchdowns. And he was a true freshman. They have him. They have true freshman Evan Stewart coming back for their sophomore season. So, yeah, I just believe in the talent of this team. I believe maybe they could get back to the top 25. They're going to be better than last season for sure. But Jimbo Fisher, he did hire Bobby Petrino as OC, so we'll see if his ego will allow him to let Bobby Petrino call plays, because I don't believe in the direction of Texas A&M if Jimbo Fisher doesn't give up play calling soon. I think you just need new life. And with some of these other teams, I'll kind of elaborate on the whole, fresh perspective, new life thing. But for Texas A&M, I think that's just what it is for right now. And we'll see. We'll see if Bobby Petrino ends up calling plays. He's a good play caller. Um, not any like innovative play caller like a Lincoln Riley, but he's a good play caller. Not a great head coach. I think we know that already. So I think it's a good hire at OC though. Just his questions about him as a person. I personally don't like the guy, but and I would bet some of the players don't like the guy, but he's just an OC. He's not the head coach. He's not running the program, so it makes sense. But for our first team of the top 25, we have UCLA. Like I said, I'm going to try to get through this quick. So sorry if I don't cover everything. Uh, but they have not a new head coach. They have a new quarterback. We're unsure if it's going to be a 5-star recruit Dante Moore, or even the transfer from Kent State, I believe, Colin Schlee. They also do have a running back. Transfer is Carson Steele from Ball State, and they're going to be replacing really productive players. So quarterback DTR, he'd been with them. DTR, he's one of those guys. He's like, how was he in college football for that long? Feels like bro's been there for a good 6-7 years. So they're losing him. It's going to be a big loss. He meant a lot to the program. I know a lot of the players loved him. A lot of the fans loved him, and even a lot of the coaching staff loved him. Um, but yeah, they're gonna have to replace him. They're also gonna have to replace Zach Charbonnet, who's headed to the NFL. And that's where Carson Steele comes in. He was the leading rusher, I believe, in all of the FBS. So, he's gonna be a good player. And Chip Kelly, he's a good run game coordinator, good offensive mind. What holds UCLA back is their defense. I have no questions about their offense, even though they're gonna be having a new quarterback, new running back. Their offense is a well-oiled machine with Chip Kelly. So it'll just be the defense. They really disappointed down the stretch. They went 9-3 last year, but then lost to USC, really heartbreaking loss. And then they also ran into a surging Arizona team that caught them off guard. So, that's my whole UCLA spiel. I do believe they'll be in the top 25 in the season. I just I could see their defense holding them back. Our next team, it will be Texas Tech. Um, they have a second-year head coach in Joey McGuire. He had a really good freshman head coach season. They went 8-5. It's not spectacular, but for a team that was down for a couple seasons, it's really good. And you saw some really good wins. They beat Texas last season, and they also beat Ole Miss in their bowl game. And they also had the win against Oklahoma as well. Oklahoma wasn't the best, but they're a big name, and anytime you beat Oklahoma as Texas Tech, it's a good thing for the program. Um, I don't really have much to say about Texas Tech. I just really believe in Joey McGuire as a coach, and also there will be an interesting quarterback competition between Donovan Smith and Tyler Shuck. Shuck, he had finished out the season, and Donovan Smith had started the season. I'm not sure if it was for injury or whatnot, but um, yeah, Shuck had came in. He was more of a running threat, as where Donovan Smith was more of that pure passer. So that'll be interesting to see. They lose Tyree Wilson to the NFL draft, but um, every team loses players, every team gains players. It's just at the rate of what you're doing it and how you're replacing that talent. That's what matters. And I just think I have a lot of faith in the culture that Joey McGuire is trying to instill in his second season. So um, yeah, there's Texas Tech for you. Our next team will be Wisconsin. In Like I said, for all these teams in the bottom 10, bottom 15, they're all marginal difference, and these are teams with more question marks than, my top 10 teams. Um, and Wisconsin is a team with a lot of question marks, but a lot of things to look forward to. Because if this were a ranking of, how I feel about the teams going forward past this season, Wisconsin would be high up there. They get Luke Fickell, head coach from Cincinnati, who, he made the playoffs with Cincinnati. He's a brilliant head coach. I don't think there's anything to take that away from him. You just can't. And they get offensive coordinator Phil Longo from North Carolina, who ran an air raid-ish type offense. It is a spread system with North Carolina. And they also get Braylon Allen, the running back, returning. And there's also a quarterback competition with them. There is the transfer from Oklahoma, Nick Evers, but then you have another transfer from SMU, Tanner Mordecai. I think Tanner Mordecai will beat Nick Evers out, but I'm not too certain on that. Evers is really talented, but Mordecai, he just has the nod and experience. He started all these years for SMU, and then I believe he even played some games for Oklahoma when he was there. So, they're both former Oklahoma transfers, so it'll be interesting. But another thing about Wisconsin is I want to talk about more about Phil Longo and how I said he was going to run the air raid. It's going to be a change of scenery for Wisconsin. On the offensive side, fans will not be used to it because Wisconsin has been more of a ground and pound team as of late. Not even just as of late, just in general. They had their years with Melvin Gordon, James White, and see, this is why I say I forget names, but Jonathan Taylor as well, and even Corey Clement. They've always had good backs, and they've never really had the great quarterback play. They did have Russell Wilson for a season, but their recent quarterbacks, what there are Alex Hornibrook, Jack Cohn, then the other one, the name's coming to me. Man, I'm gonna hate myself if I don't get this. He's the quarterback for Florida and Graham Mertz. So, you haven't been really used to good quarterback play, but you have talented quarterbacks coming in. So I think it'll be interesting to see Wisconsin with a whole new identity. And for this season, I think they could be in the top 25. They're in my top 25. But yeah, we'll see what happens with them. That's just a team I just believe in going forward more. But I wouldn't be surprised if that shows in their first season. Then you have UTSA, and this is also more of a respect thing. They're returning a lot on their team, and they were one of the few ranked Group of 5 teams this last season, the 2022 season. And like I said, yeah, it's more of a respect thing. One big question mark for them is they're replacing their OC, Will Stein. He had left to go to Oregon, and that's a team we're going to talk about later for sure. But yeah, their new OC, let me just pull up my notes. It is Justin Burke, and he's going to be their co-offensive coordinator. I'm not sure who their other one they had that was with Will Stein, but I believe he's still there. But yeah, it's more of respecting. They could fall out. It's a lot harder for a Group of 5 teams to be in the top 25. So, for them to even make it last year, it's a great thing. It's a great thing for the program. But yeah, that's all I got to say about UTSA. 21, we have the Texas Longhorns. So, um, I couldn't tell you where they finished last season, and some Texas fans will be mad at this. Some college football fans will be mad at this. They should be a lot higher for the name that Texas is, and that's not to say I think they're a great team. I think they will be a great team. You could just never really count on them. And for all the jokes there is about Texas being back, I think it could be legitimate this year. And I know everybody says it every season, but it's I mean, it's they have a lot of talent, and they have quarterback Arch Manning coming in. People say it's going to be a competition. I don't think it's going to be much of a competition. I think Quinn Ewers, he'll get the nod over 17-year-old Arch Manning, 18-year-old. And they have legitimate NFL receivers. They have Xavier Worthy, and then they have AD Mitchell coming in from from Georgia. And they're both Xavier Worthy. He had a little bit of a down season last year, but the season before that, he was really good talent. And then AD Mitchell, he never really put it together at Georgia. He had flash plays, flash games, but never a true breakout. And I think he could get it in this offense. Steve Sarkisian, he's a really creative play caller, and it's not to say that Todd Monken wasn't at Georgia, but as a whole different style of offense. I think they'll pass the ball a lot more. And at Georgia, you did have a crowded weapons room. Brock Bowers, Darnell Washington, the tight ends, they were the main focal point of that offense. So I think this change of scenery for AD Mitchell, it could help him out. Um, but yeah, I think Texas, they're just a team that they just have a lot to prove, I believe. And they never really reached the heights they thought they were going to reach with Tom Herman. So we'll see with Steve Sarkisian. Me personally, I'm a bit on the fence of him as a head coach. I do think they did have a good year last year, though. Like, if you're a Texas fan, you don't feel bad about the team going forward. It's just, do you feel great about them? Do you feel elite national contender? Not quite, and I think they have to prove that. But yeah, we can get into my next team. Just give me a sec. So the next team will be South Carolina. Um, this was a little bit of a surprise team last year. Everybody could tell you they think Shane Beamer is a good coach. But even with those questions out of the way, how good of a coach is Shane Beamer? Um, Nobody ever really saw those 2 wins coming at the end of the season, and that was a blowout win against Tennessee, and then their road win against Clemson. The Tennessee game they won in dominant fashion. See, now the thing is, I would have this team a lot higher. They definitely proved they could hang with some of the better teams in the college football league. So, um, the question marks being they're just losing a little bit. Was it their OC that they lost, or am I thinking of Arkansas? Not too positive about that, but I do know they are losing Jaheim Bell, the tight end. He is going to Florida State, and they do have some returning talent though, and a big help will be their quarterback Spencer Rattler. A lot of people could hate on him, but I do think I'm not too fond of Spencer Rattler the person. He was on, I believe, the QB1 show. But what I will say is, I think going to South Carolina was kind of like a humbling experience for him. It helped him become a better player, and it's not to say he's the greatest player, but I do believe in him and his upside at South Carolina. So that's a really good thing for them going forward. And they also retain their wide receiver, Juice Wells. Yeah, Juice Wells. I always think Juice Williams or Juice Wells, but Juice Wells. And he was legitimately one of the better SEC wide receivers. So you get those two back, and then you have Shane Beamer at head coach, and I think there's a lot to look forward to if you're a South Carolina fan. And then our next team is Kansas State, who so the interesting thing about Kansas State is people will ask you, who won the Big 12 last season? Your mind will automatically think TCU, but it was actually Kansas State. They had lost to TCU earlier in the season, and then they beat them later in the season in the Big 12 championship, and they won the Big 12. They lost their bowl games to a really talented Alabama team. I don't take anything away from them. Um, Kansas State's one of those teams that would be a lot higher, but they are losing Deuce Vaughn. And anytime you get a player like Deuce Vaughn at Kansas State, he's one of the most productive rushers in college football past couple seasons. It's hard to replace because Kansas State doesn't recruit on the level of some of the better Big 12 teams. And speaking of Big 12, let me go back to Texas for a little bit. I didn't even mention that they're going to come back or they're going to go to the SEC next season. But for this ranking, I guess it's kind of irrelevant because it's for this season, and they'll be in the Big 12. And it's the same with Oklahoma too. Most of these teams, they're not going to want to leave the Big 12 on a bad note. The one thing they're going to want to do is win the Big 12 in their final year, just to give a big middle finger to the Big 12 guys. But yeah, let me go back to Kansas State. Yeah, so for Kansas State, you get your quarterback back, Will Howard. I believe that was his name, and you're losing Deuce Vaughn, who's a really good talent. And I think if you retain him, you'd be a lot higher on this list. He was a big part of their identity going forward. Their head coach, Colin Klein, he's legitimately a really good head coach. So it's you got to feel good about the team going forward. As for their Big 12 contending chances, they could win the Big 12. They showed it last season. It's just I don't think they're a playoff caliber team, and it's no slight to them. But this year only 4 teams make the playoffs. It'll expand next season, so that conversation will be a lot different. Kansas State is a team though. Kansas State, yeah, is a team though I believe can be in the top 12 in any given year. So For the expanded playoffs, you could count on them being in there maybe 1 or 2 years into there. But yeah, so our next team is North Carolina, and this is a team I was a little up and down with. They retained quarterback Drake May, legitimate Heisman candidate, Heisman favorite. The thing is that they're losing a lot. So receivers, you lose Josh Downs, you lose your OC, Phil Longo, and you lose some on defense. And I think that'll just make his job 100% harder. It's not to say the player's bad, but I think his numbers could look worse, and even the team could look a little worse than it was last season. They had lost the Holiday Bowl to Oregon, but they did have a really good season, and making it there is an accomplishment in itself. But yeah, I think it's just the losses at OC, and I still have them on top 25, so I think they'll be a good team. They've never been a great team though. Mac Brown, he was expected to do great things at North Carolina, and I think he has done his fair share for the program. But with a lot of teams in this caliber, I just can't see them making the playoff. But you never know. TCU was a team that nobody had making the playoffs. They went 5-7 the year before. They're not really a blue blood program at all. So it'll be interesting looking at North Carolina going forward. I just don't see them making the playoff. But I do think they'll be a good team, and with a good quarterback, you could really do anything. And then my next team is one of more respect things as Tulane, but they are losing Tajay Spears, who I also believe was a big part of their identity. But the good thing for them is they actually do keep their head coach Willie Fritz. I know there was some chatter about him going to potentially, what school was it? I think it was Georgia Tech. There was like a false report about him going to Georgia Tech, and I think they ended up hiring their interim, who was Brent Key. It could have been Georgia Tech or maybe Coastal Carolina. I'm not too positive, or maybe that was a whole different thing with Jamie Chadwell. Um, but yeah, I think Tulane, they'll be a good team this upcoming season. You get your quarterback back, Michael Pratt. So they have the really big one against USC in the I believe it was the Cotton Bowl. So I think just for that program, it's just a really big win, and hopefully that win is enough momentum to carry into the next season with your quarterback that you're retaining for next season. So yeah, Tulane, I have them at 17. Like I said, with group of 5 teams, it's always harder to show what you're capable of as a team. So to see them lower than this, it won't be much of a surprise. But to see them here won't also be much of a surprise either. I think they were a legitimately really good team last season. My next team is Oregon State. So Oregon State, they were a team that was a little under the radar last season. While the season was going, there wasn't really too much talk about them. Even when they had that game against USC where it was really close, they lost like 17-10. You still don't really hear too much about Oregon State. You heard more about USC, like, oh wow, why'd they have this close game against Oregon State? But down the stretch, they actually proved to be a really good team. And the difference between Oregon State and a lot of the other Pac-10 Pac-12 teams that are in the Pac-12 right now is the fact that they actually had a really good defense. And I'm not really a big fan of Pac-12 defenses because you get one player from another conference, say like a Bo Nix, and he transfers to the Pac-12 and is all of a sudden putting up Heisman numbers and stuff. It's kind of ridiculous. And I respect Oregon State for having a really good defense at the Pac-12 level. And then you are getting DJ. I always butcher this name, DJ Uiagalelei. Yeah, from Clemson as your starting quarterback. He will start the season bearing injury. I don't think there's any like true competition there. I think that'll do a lot for them. They lacked stability at the quarterback position last season. I'm not sure if it was due to injury. I think it was due to injury. But their quarterbacks weren't great. Your offense wasn't really great. It was more so a good offense, but you had a good defense. And as long as you were able to score, you were able to, keep the other team down. And they ended up going 10-3 with the win over Florida. And honestly, that game against Florida, I thought was a bit weird. You had Florida, who is an SEC team, but they weren't the best SEC team. They went 6-6 in the regular season, and you put them against one of the better teams in the Pac-12. I don't know what they were trying to do with that. But Florida was clearly outmatched, and Oregon State just to control the game. So I think there's good things for the Beavers going forward. They did get a big win against their rival, Oregon this last season. I do feel better about Oregon going forward, but that's not to say I don't feel really good about Oregon State. I have them in the middle of this list because I'm not sure if, you know, they're gonna I think they'll be a top 25 team for sure, but I don't think they're gonna, be up there with the playoff teams. But this is a team that I can see making a New Year's Six bowl. So, um, yeah, I think this is the first team I could actually see making a New Year's Six bowl on here, out of all the teams I've done. Um, Maybe Texas, but because I believe in the talent, but I'm not sure how close they are to putting it all together. So, um, yeah, there's Oregon State for you. My next team will be TCU, and I might get some pushback on this. They're really low compared to what they were last season, but I think you have to really be considerate of everything they're losing. They're losing a lot on offense. And it's not like they're losing a lot of players, but what they are losing is their most productive players. So you're losing quarterback Max Duggan, Quentin Johnson. You're losing running back Kendre Miller. And I believe Tay Barber is the name, the receiver, number 4. You're losing him. You do get Chandler Morris back. He was your starting quarterback for this season before he got hurt, and then Max Duggan had filled in. You know, Sonny Dykes, he believed in Chandler Morris more to start the season. I'm not sure if that ever changed, but there was a point in time where he sat there and thought Chandler Morris was a better quarterback than Max Duggan. So I think, maybe they could be in good hands. It's hard to say for sure. Chandler Morris hasn't really done much in his career yet, but he does have some starter experience. And one addition that I do really like for them is Jack Besh, the wide receiver from LSU. As an LSU fan, I think Jack Besh, he's a really great receiver that just he had his freshman season where he did produce quite a bit, and that was with subpar quarterback play. You had Max Johnson there, um, but then you have Brian Kelly come in the new regime, and he just really can't find his footing there. I think he'll be a great fit in Sonny Dykes' offense. You have quick hitting passes and that spread system, the hurry up offense, really, really college offense. I think it'll work great for Jack Besh. So I think I like this team more so going forward than this year. But that's not to say I wouldn't be surprised if they contend for the Big 12. They did it last season. They made the playoff last season. They had an incredible run. It's not really a slight to this team. They are the first team in the top 15, and I feel a lot better about these teams than the ones I've previously listed. So, yeah, it's a good trajectory for TCU. Then my next team will be Utah, and I won't say too much about them. But what I will say is Utah's one of those teams where they're not going to make the playoff, but every year they're going to be a contending Pac-12 title team. So they won the Pac-12 last year against USC. They won the year before against Oregon, I believe. And this is one of those good. Actually, no, I will say this is one of those great teams, just great, not elite teams every season. They have a lot less to work with recruiting wise. Utah isn't the biggest recruiting hotbed ever, but Kyle Whittingham, he's just a great head coach, and they had some question marks about their OC Andy Ludwig potentially going to Notre Dame, but he decided to stay. And they have quarterback Cam Rising returning, so I think this 14th rank is really justified for them. I think they'll be a great team. Potentially could win the Pac-12 title again. But as a playoff team, not certain if they could ever put it all together for that. It would take kind of like an infusion of, them playing really good football as well as just having that talent there. Because I think on some years they could have that talent. The year when they had Tyler Huntley, I believe it was 2019. Um, and they had guys. They had Zach Moss. Keithy was a better tight end than Dalton Kincaid has kind of stolen the show, but um, they had him, they had Jalen Johnson, Devin Lloyd, just some really good players. So the stars could potentially align for Utah. Just will it be this year? Who knows? Who knows? Our next team will be Oregon, who they're lower on this ranking than a lot of people will put them. I've heard talks about them being like a top 10 team, top 7, 6. Not everybody has them there, but I've heard it definitely. You're retaining Bo Nix, who will be a Heisman favorite this upcoming season. Um, yeah, there's not too much to say about this team. They lose their OC, Kenny Dillingham. to Arizona State. He's their head coach now. They replace him with Will Stein from a team that I mentioned earlier, UTSA. I think you're just losing so much on defense. And not only are you losing much on defense, but this was a defense that wasn't great last season. They had some good games, but it definitely affected them down the stretch. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I don't see national championship aspirations with this team, but what I do see is New Year's Six Bowl potential, and I do believe in them going forward. I believe they're a playoff caliber team. Just maybe not this season, but I could see it for seasons upcoming. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I get a weird vibe from Oregon. But Dan Lanning, he had a really great season as a really great first year as a head coach for Oregon, and I believe in them going forward. Just this year, I don't know what their peak will be, but they will be a really good team. It's not to say they won't. Just expectations versus how they will perform, I think it's a little bit skewed. And I guess this upcoming team, Tennessee, it's kind of the same deal. They had a really surprising season. Nobody thought they were going to be as good as they were this season. Josh Heupel in his second year, they went 7-6 in his first year, but this year, um, they go 11-2 with a bowl win against Clemson. A really dominant win too. Um, there are just a little bit question marks on this team. My main concern would also be, like it was with Oregon, their defense. They had some games where they laid stinkers. They had some good games, but they had some games, and I think it's just the style of offense they run too. Really quick scoring offense, and I think it'll be quick scoring again this year as well. You have a whole new quarterback, Joe Milton. I think he's the favorite to start. They also have the 5-star quarterback, Nico. I believe his name's Lama Leava. Correct me if I'm wrong. Really talented guy, but I think Milton just has the experience over him, which will shift the tides in his favor. Um, but yeah, I just think there's a lot of question marks on defense. But on offense, you are returning a lot. You're returning Jabari Small, Jalen Wright. So I could see Tennessee having a pretty dominant run game, and you're also returning Squirrel White, their receiver. He had a pretty good year last year. You are losing Cedric Tillman and Jalen Hyatt though to the NFL, and they were really good contributors. But Josh Heupel usually has a good offensive unit. Question marks will just be on defense. And for our next team, and this is when I say my bias might come in, but this is genuinely how I feel about the team. And I do believe I'm more of an unbiased person. It's Notre Dame at 11. You hear talk about them being like a playoff team. I don't think they're going to make the playoffs. And if they do, I don't see them winning a playoff game. But there's a lot to like with Marcus Freeman coming in. And even their quarterback Sam Hartman from Wake Forest coming in as well. So I think I'm just more down on this team when it comes to, they have a really good recruiting class coming in, and even for 2024, I believe they have one of the best recruiting classes coming in. Marcus Freeman is doing a better job than Brian Kelly did at recruiting, but I just don't believe in them until those recruits come in. The talent they have, I think, is just a little bit overrated. And you're also losing Tommy Reese to Alabama, who I don't think he gets enough credit for how good the offense was there, just because I think you were really lacking at the receiver position. And Notre Dame fans will say, like, oh, our offense stalled at times. Well, you didn't have a good quarterback. You had Drew Pine, who he was a good quarterback, but he was just really limited. Doesn't have much of an arm. He's a shorter guy. It's not to say his height really matters, but he didn't really have much of an arm. And yeah, it was just arm limitations. Really, I'm like thinking, like, man, what was wrong with this guy? But yeah, you're just limited at offensive positions. Their defense, I think, will be really good this upcoming season. You have a lot of returners there, and you even have a lot of returners on the offense, just like your running backs and receivers and stuff. But like I said, I just don't believe in them being like a national title contender until they get that help at receiver and even tight end. You're losing Michael Mayer. He was your biggest receiving threat last season, so who even knows. There's been a lot of negative of this team surrounding mainly just the coordinator positions. Their defensive coordinator position, Al Golden, I want to say his name is. Yeah. Um, he stays from last season, but you have your OC, Gerard Parker, I believe his name is. Um, there was a lot of controversy surrounding them promoting him to offensive coordinator because they tried to get other guys. They tried to get Andy Ludwig. I believe they also talked to, or maybe this was Alabama, talked to the Washington offensive coordinator. Um, but they weren't willing to go like deep reach in their pockets for the money to hire them. And I just think that, and when you're Notre Dame, you have to strive for the best. You have to get who you want. You're a prestigious program, so just act like it. But that's kind of my gripe with them. I do think they'll be a good team. They went 9-4. They beat South Carolina in the Gator Bowl. It was a really good win for the program. And even at South Carolina, that loss, I don't think that's a bad loss for South Carolina. I think the fact that they're there in the Gator Bowl, the fact that they had a good season is it's positive trajectory for both teams involved in it. Um, you will you will see if Sam Hartman maybe might get some competition from the quarterbacks you have on the roster. The main one being Tyler Buckner from San Diego. Um, I think Sam Hartman will start. That's the reason you bring in a guy like him. But the question could always be asked. So our next team is USC, and they might be lower, especially with the Heisman quarterback. They might be lower than what you guys might think they might have been. Um, but defense, Lincoln Riley, man, he just has beef with his defense. He keeps Alex Grinch as a defensive coordinator, which is a little bit of a question mark, head scratching decision. I I think it's just time to go for new blood there. You had your years with him at Oklahoma, and he was a little underwhelming at USC. You're also losing Tuli Tuipulotu on that defensive side, so it's like, man, like, who will they have? Who will step up, and will their defense be a good unit? That's the only question mark you have. Lincoln Riley, he will get the offense straight no matter what year it is. Never had a bad offense at Oklahoma. Comes into USC, their quarterback wins Heisman. They have great receivers. Jordan Addison's headed to the NFL. You have Mario Williams. He's a really good receiver too. You have playmakers, and they're losing some of them, but they're replenishing in the transfer portal. You get Dorian Singer from Arizona coming in. He's probably going to be your number one receiver off the bat. But that's not to say, you have Mario Williams. You have oh man, Brendan Rice, who had a really good game in the Cotton Bowl against Tulane. But yeah, it's just a matter of if they're going to be able to get that defense together. And that brings me to my next team. I believe this is my highest Pac-12 team. USC, UCLA, they're both going to the Big Ten pretty soon, but this is just for this year. So I'm going to be talking about them as if they're a Pac-12 team for the foreseeable future. But you have Washington, and yeah, they are my highest Pac-12 team. I'm looking right now. And Washington is a team that I could easily see make the playoffs. You're returning a lot. Michael Penix Jr., he decides to forego the NFL draft and actually stay for his college season. He was a legit Heisman contender last year and will be a legit Heisman contender this season. You have your whole offense pretty much returning besides the running back, but they have Dylan Johnson from Mississippi State coming in to supplant that. But let me look at their offensive weapons because like I said, I forget names. Oh yeah, but you got Rome Odunze, I believe his name is, as well as Jalen McMillan, both returning, both were 1,000-yard receivers. Rome Odunze specifically, he was a dynamic weapon for them. So you just have so much productivity returning. All these players are in sync with each other. If there's any time for Washington to want to make a run, it would be now. And even Kalen DeBoer, head coach, was in his first season, so even he's learning on the job. He has a lot more experience coming into this year. He knows what to do now. He knows what works. He knows what doesn't. Their defense did struggle in some games, but they're returning a lot on the defensive side too, and I think they could turn it around on that side of the ball as well. So this is a team that, and I think I could just say this now. All these teams that are in my top 10, I could see them making the playoffs. They're legit playoff contenders. Some of them I could see winning a national title. Some of them it's hard for me to see them winning a title, but I think all these teams do have national title aspirations. All these teams in the top 10. So yeah, this is just, and even USC, I believe, could win a national title. So all these teams that are going to be in my top 10, these are teams that I have full faith in. I love the direction they're going in. And that leads us to our next team, which this team I'm actually a fan of. It's LSU. And like I said, I try not to be too biased, but with LSU, there's a lot to love. Brian Kelly in his second season, he's a legit underrated head coach. Notre Dame fans, they'll tell you he's a bad coach. "Oh, he never wins the big game." Notre Dame never had the talent to win the big game. Sorry, it's just it is what it is. And it's not to say they didn't have talent at some of the positions. It's just the important positions like quarterback, receiver. Those were positions in need. You had Ian Book as one of his best quarterbacks. And that's to say maybe Brian Kelly has trouble recruiting quarterback, developing them. But LSU quarterback Jaden Daniels. He played better than all these um all of these Notre Dame quarterbacks of old. So I don't know if that's a Brian Kelly problem or more of a Notre Dame problem. But with LSU, and like I said, all these teams, I view them as top 10 teams that could contend for a title because they're just returning a lot of productive players, not too many question marks. And for LSU, you get your receivers back, Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas, you get Kyron Lacey coming back. Kayshon Bouttie's leading for the NFL draft, but he had a little bit of a down season, so I don't think it'll be too big of a loss. You're also getting tight end Mason Taylor back, who was really underrated, had a great true freshman season. Quarterback Jaden Daniels, you get him back as well as quarterback Garrett Nussmeier. There might be a bit of competition between those two. Um, I would say they're leaning more Jaden Daniels, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if Garrett Nussmeier started this next season or even started in the season, like mid-season, they might make the change. But either way, I think both quarterbacks are really good college football quarterbacks. So you're not mad at any of it. If Jaden Daniels goes down, you're not upset. It'll be unfortunate, but you're in good hands with Garrett Nussmeier. Both different styles of quarterback. Jaden Daniels, he's more of a timid passer, but he's great with his legs. One of the best dual threats in the league. And then you have Garrett Nussmeier, who's a gunslinger, but he does have the occasional turnover. So two different styles of play. They'll figure out what they're going to do on there. You also return Mason Smith, Harold Perkins. Smith missed last season with the ACL injury, but he's legitimate 5-star talent. In his first year, I believe it was 2021, he really impressed. So you get that back on the D line. Pair him with Mekhi Wingo, who's also returning. You lose Ojulari, you lose your corners, Mekhi Gardner and Jarek Bernard Converse. But you do supplant them in the transfer portal with J.K. Johnson, Deuce Chestnut, Denver Harris, who's also he's a legit talent. So I think they'll figure it out on the defensive side. You do have questions on there, but you have Matt House, who was a good DC in his second season. And you have Mike Denbrock with the offense returning pretty much everybody. And even on the O-line, I think you lose one starter, but they supplant that in the transfer portal as well. So LSU, I think if you're an LSU fan, you got to be excited about this upcoming season. And not only, if they have a disappointing season, Brian Kelly is a great head coach. He will turn this team around. For the future, they're just really good team if you look at their outlook. And that leads me to my next team, which is Florida State. Mike Norvell, I believe in his fourth season as head coach. But last season, you started to see them put it all together. They get that big win against LSU in the beginning of the season. They play them this upcoming season. That'll be a really fun game to watch, a really big game. But you got to love a lot about this team. They're returning almost everybody. Some NFL guys, Jared Verse, he decides to come back for his last season. And then Jaheim Bell from South Carolina, legitimate talent. He comes to Florida State to try to compete for a national title. Do I think they're going to win the national title this year? Probably not. But I think this is one of those years. It's like if you're Florida State, this is your best chance. You got to go all in. So I do think they're a playoff contending team. You just got talent on all levels. Biggest question for them will just be the depth. Say if you have injuries, who's going to fill in? Because that's what one of the better programs do. They have depth. They replace guys. Florida State, and they're recruiting at a high level now too. So I think they're going to have a really great season this year. Their biggest things will be to one, dethrone Clemson, and then two, get that big win against LSU so they could be taken a lot more seriously. Because if they win against LSU, they could afford maybe a loss on the schedule. But if you win against LSU, you got to beat Clemson, So that's how I feel about Florida State. That brings me to my next team, Clemson. I believe this is my highest ACC team on here. And now the thing with Clemson is this is more of a respect thing as well. they had a really disappointing year last year, and even the season before that, they had a pretty disappointing team because these 2 past Clemson teams were not the Clemson teams that you saw in the championship against Alabama, LSU. Um, it was a different Clemson team, and I think a lot of that has to do with Dabo Swinney kind of he hasn't been adapting, but I think this might be the year that he finally sees that change, and I think, the biggest indicator of that will be, OC Garrett Riley from, TCU, the brother of, Lincoln Riley. Um, he's a really good play caller. They ran that spread offense, and also I did mention that I don't think I mentioned it that TCU has a new OC, Kendall Briles, but I do think Sonny Dykes will be more in charge of the offense, so I don't think it'll affect them too much. But Garrett Riley, he's a creative play caller. He had TCU's offense the best they've honestly ever been. So um, I think that bodes well from Clemson. It's the first outside hire Dabo Swinney has made in a really, really long time. Um, so I think much as they try to adapt, Dabo Swinney adapts to the new age of college football. He's not quite there yet in NIL and transfer portal, but with the new style offenses that they have, I think that's just a great thing for Clemson going forward, and that's why I have them high on this list. I think that OC hire will push them higher than they have been in years past. These last couple seasons. Um, but yeah, that's all I got to say about them. They get quarterback Cade Klubnik back for this next season. He did get some starts on the season. He had the start against Tennessee at the end. He didn't play too well, but um, and they could have broken his confidence just a little bit, but it got him experience, and so I don't think he'll look completely lost out there. You had the inconsistencies with DJ Uiagalelei. Um, so I think maybe Cade Klubnik, he could play at his level, if not at a higher level. He's a 5-star talent. I believe he's the second quarterback in his class. So, a lot of good things with Clemson. Um, One player I want to see, that I'm excited to see is Will Shipley in this new offense. He's a really great back, and I think he'll be able to be used in creative ways that I forget what the what the Clemson's OC name is. Is it Starling? Is that somebody I'm thinking of? No, I don't know. I don't know his name. Please don't kill me. Um, Streeter, Starling. I don't know. I don't know his name. But yeah, you had some really disappointing offenses with the last OC, and then Tony Elliott the year before. So I think it'll be interesting to see everybody in this new offense, but mainly Will Shipley because he's a really great talent. And then my fifth team is Penn State, and some might say I'm higher on them than most. Penn State's never ranked this high at the end of the season, but I think if there's a year for them to put it all together, it's this year. I do think they're a legit playoff contender to make their first playoff with James Franklin as head coach, and their just first college football playoff in general. Um, but this year will answer the question definitely of can James Franklin win the big games? Because I think with the schedule they have, I think they'll beat most of the teams. Just that main question mark: can they beat Michigan? Can they beat Ohio State? They beat Michigan in the past. They beat Ohio State in the past. It's just all of those years they disappoint in some of the even bigger games. The games they have to win to solidify their status as one of the top teams. Um, but yeah, last season you saw them win every game besides Michigan and Penn State, and they not Penn State, Michigan and Ohio State, and they won in the Rose Bowl against Utah. So it's just that one thing. I think if they would have beat Ohio State, they might have actually made the playoffs. Because Ohio State did get that fourth spot. I'm trying to think of the other teams that were contending for it. Yeah, I think they might have made the playoffs if they beat Ohio State. So James Franklin just has to get that monkey off his back. And if they make the playoffs, this is a team that I can see winning a national title. They have a new quarterback in Drew Allar. He's replacing Sean Clifford, but to be honest, I think he's a lot more talented than Sean Clifford. Maybe he might not be as good processing as him, but I think the upside of Drew Allar will make this offense a lot better. And you also get Keandre Lambert-Smith, and you got to feel good about Penn State's running games. They have two freshman running backs in Katron Allen and Nick Singleton. They're gonna run all over. They're gonna run all over the Big Ten. in the Big Ten. They're a really physical conference, but they're gonna run all over them. They got the playmakers. So I think this is a team you got to feel really good about this upcoming season, and even going forward. Their running backs, they're only true freshmen, so they'll have this season. They'll have the season after. Your running backs are the identity of this offense. So going forward, past 2023 and the 2024 season, you just got to feel really good about the team. That leads me to my fourth team, Ohio State, and these top four teams, I'm not saying are shoo-ins for the playoffs. I just think you got to feel better about them than most of the other teams on here, just given their history. But Ohio State, you have Ryan Day. A big question will be if they're going to be able to beat Michigan. They have a new quarterback. It'll either be Kyle McCord or Devin Brown. But regardless of who ends up winning the job, they're gonna be one of those people in the Heisman voting. They're gonna be putting up crazy numbers. It's Ohio State. They always replace quarterback with quarterback. They might not do good in the NFL, but Ohio State quarterbacks are always more of the prolific college quarterbacks that are in the league at the time. So you're also returning them as well as you're not returning, but you're getting a new quarterback as well as returning your wide receivers and Marvin Harrison and Amika Egbuka, and then also you get your running backs back to Travion Henderson, Mayan Williams. So this offense has no questions. The defense does have some questions, but they weren't really a great unit last year, so you can't get too much worse on that side of the ball. So it'll be interesting to see if they get a lot better. Um, but you got to beat Michigan. You got to beat Michigan. It is what it is. You lost the past 2 years. You beat them, I think, 11 years straight before that. You just got to beat them. I mean, that's the game. At number 3, I have Alabama. This was a team that disappointed just a little bit last year. They had a really great season, but it wasn't to Alabama standards. This is a team that is championship or bust almost every year. You're losing Bryce Young. You're losing Will Anderson. You're losing a lot, but Alabama replaces talent like no other. And they have, I believe, the number 1 recruiting class this upcoming season. So I think they'll be just fine. I don't really have to say too much about Alabama. You got Nick Saban as head coach. We can move on to the next team. I'm sorry if that's not enough, but there's not much you can say about Alabama. You get new coordinators in Tommy Rees and Kevin Steele, but I don't see them being worse than what you had in Bill O'Brien and Pete Golding. Specifically, Pete Golding, I don't think he was great of a DC. Not to say Kevin Steele's too much better, but we've seen Kevin Steele field some really good defenses, so you got to feel at least a little bit better about that. And then with Tommy Rees, he's more of a younger mind, so he could provide like a fresh input on the game. But yeah, we could go into my next team, which is Michigan. And Michigan, you're just returning everybody, and I think that's why I feel good about this Michigan team. I think they'll make the playoff. You have everybody back. You have JJ McCarthy back. You have Quorum back. You have Will Johnson. Your corner that you feel really good about. He had his freshman season. He's really good. He's coming back. You're having most of your receivers come back. I believe is it Ronnie Bell that's leaving? But this is a running team. You have most of your O linemen coming back too. So you have Quorum and Donovan Edwards. They will be one of the best running back tandems in the league this upcoming season. There's not many question marks on this team, and I think that's why I feel so good about them. The big question will be if they could win the big game, meaning can they win a playoff game? They made it the past 2 seasons. One, they lost to Georgia. Understandable, really good team. Georgia ended up winning the national championship that year, and then you lost to TCU this last season, which it's kind of a bad loss to have. Not to say TCU was bad, but they went on. They lost to Georgia in the fashion they lost to Georgia in 65-7. But if you're a program like Michigan, you can't lose playoff games against TCU. You can't, you can't lose against teams that you have better talent than. Because I do think Michigan was the more talented team, but TCU, they were the better team. Michigan got out coached. The players at TCU, they played a lot better than Michigan players did. Michigan turned over the ball a lot more than TCU did. So it's just a game you got to win. And if you're Jim Harbaugh, that taste of defeat, it lingers. So, yeah, you just gotta win. You just gotta win a playoff game. That's where I am with Michigan. If they don't this year, I'm gonna have some serious question marks about them, and maybe next season I won't rate them so high. I actually won't rate them so high if they don't win a playoff game this year, um, because that's how I am with the team right now. I want them to go prove themselves, and get back to their winning ways. And then number one, no questions asked here. It's Georgia. They're losing their quarterback Stetson Bennett. They're also losing their OC. But it's just Georgia just recruits at a higher level than every team in the NCAA. So, they're gonna be the number one team. They're gonna have a great defense again. Most of their guys are coming back on defense. On offense, you are returning back Brock Bowers, but you are losing Broderick Jones. You're losing Darnell Washington, um, and Stetson Bennett as well as I believe Kenny McIntosh. But Georgia replaces talent. You're gonna have a QB competition with Carson Beck, Gunnar Stockton, and Brock Vandegrift. I believe Carson Beck is the front runner for that. Um, but he will have weapons. You get the transfers. Dominic Levitt from Missouri. He's more of that slot guy to pair with Lad McConkey. Really good route runner. And you also get wide receiver Ra Thomas from I was gonna say Georgia, from Mississippi State, who I believe he was in his sophomore year, but he's a really talented guy. He's gonna be that perimeter guy, replacing AD Mitchell. And you also have Arian Smith returning. So I think whoever the quarterback is in good hands. You got McConkey, Thomas, Levet, a good running back stable. They do use three guys. And then you also have Brock Bowers, the most prolific tight end in college football returning. And there's not too much to say about Georgia. And yeah, I believe that'll be the end of my top 25 video. Um, it's a lot to talk, so I'm sorry if I sounded a little bit, gassed towards the end. But um, if you're any of these teams on this list, you got to feel good about this upcoming season. I had a lot of fun making this video. I had a lot of fun ranking these teams. So just leave a like, comment, subscribe, show your support. And as far as what I have to say, that's really all. Thank you for watching, and hope to see you next time. And peace.